We are not experts. Economics. What is that? It's a complicated subject. Not my thing. People talk about it with serious faces. Neither am I an expert, nor am I educated in university spaces. All I know is GDP, GDP, GDP. Gross domestic problems, I think. The totality of household crises in which we currently sink. My friend, let me bring you some tea to share our side of the GDP story for you to see. I keep hearing the GDP is rising or that the GDP has gone down and oil prices soar high. When a crisis strikes, the front pages of local newspapers don't lie. We cut back on oil, salt, dal and all we consume, while dreams of the fastest growing economy resume. Meanwhile, our leaders dance to the tunes of the US sanctions on Russian oil. So much for Hindutva's love for the Indian soil. Decolonization, the leaders proclaim at the front door. Western imperialism and the mob lynching of Muslims and Dalits slowly poison our homes at the back door. Oh, what a shame. But who am I to condemn the imperialist annihilation of our lives? I am no expert in this political game. Imminent economic collapse, you say? But then markets were always bad. Our crisis was never your news. Our stomachs were always half full, and our children could never finish their school. So you see, crisis is our dharma. It is capitalism's karma. Yet, we are not perpetually sad. We build our wealth in friendships, in sharing food, through kitchen fights, collective movements of outbursts, laughter and emotional release are our resilience rights. It's when the gross domestic problems run high, our sovereign voices begin to rise. Hi friends, my name is Dr. Norita Roy Chaudhary, and I wrote this poem recently in the context of the current crisis that we are facing, and also the US attack on Iran, US-Israel attack on Iran, in addition to the ongoing genocide that is happening in Palestine, and how this is affecting the world globally, and how authoritarian governments at the domestic levels are responding to that. And the poem is written, so basically the poem is written in the context of rising authoritarianism and Western imperialism, where crisis is often framed by mainstream discourse as a sudden event, such as the 2008 financial crash or the impending oil shocks linked to the US-Israel wars and the ongoing genocide in Palestine and across the Middle East. Yet, crisis under capitalism is not episodic. It is structural. It is always present, reaching tipping points only under intensified conditions of violence and extraction. So, friends, it's important to remember that crisis is not a sudden event. It's an ongoing process because it is an inherent or an intrinsic feature of capitalism. Meaning, crisis is not accidental. It is a design flaw of the capitalist system. Now, let me explain. So, socio-ecological crisis is inherent to capitalism's survival through the contradictions of labor and capital, as well as labor and ecosystem functions, or the biological life as such. So, there is a contradictions between the labor and capital, or the labor and the owners of the means of production, as well as contradictions between the labor and the way the biological life reproduces or regenerates itself. So, drawing from Marxist theory, environmental sociologists have highlighted two key contradictions. On the demand side, capitalism produces overproduction by extracting surplus value from labor while simultaneously shrinking the labor class's capacity to consume, leaving commodities unabsorbed. So basically, the crisis on the demand side is basically capitalism creates the conditions of underdevelopment and poverty to the extent that people don't even have money to consume the goods that are already produced. This explains when markets absolutely crash, or when markets go terribly bad, people end up buying less stuff from the markets, like I also mentioned in the poem. So moving on to the supply side, capitalism's expansive logic depletes its ecological foundations, producing conditions of underproduction. In this sense, socio-ecological crises undermine the very relations and conditions on which capitalism depends. So basically, capitalism is a self-sabotaging system in that it creates conditions for its own death. The current climate and biodiversity crises reflect disruptions in planetary metabolism caused by the imbalance between production, accumulation, and life processes. The rise of resistance movements across the Middle East and the renewed global calls for self-determination emerge within and against these structural design flaws of the capitalist system. Finally, and most importantly, the poem is titled "We Are Not Experts." The reason is it invites us to question who are the real experts? Is it ordinary people, or the politicians or the elite classes who dominate institutions such as academia, think tanks, and so on? Structures and already existing institutions that often marginalized or even erase other perspectives and viewpoints. So friends, the point of this video is to sort of highlight the link between crisis and capitalism, and also highlight the fact that in all these processes what ends up happening, or what has been happening, and is the ignorance of the ordinary people's voices. And the more these voices do not resurface in the form of resistance movements or calls for self-determination, the more capital and authoritarian governments will misuse their state power to simply continue clamping down on dissent and defiance. And what is happening in Middle East and the global and the impending oil shortage that is also predicted to extremely impact India, what is doing is, like, our current governments are in a position where they are requesting the US to allow them to temporarily import oil from Russia, just because US had imposed sanctions on Russia's oil. The Indian government is having to ask US whether they allow us to continue importing, and this is a feature of these economic sanctions, and which academics popularly call as the economic warfare, where sanctions are used as imperialistic modes of control of the governments across the globe. So the poem also highlights the aspect of the politics of the experts, in the sense that who are the experts, and if we are ever to imagine an economic system beyond capitalism, who do we consult for that purpose? Do we consult the same old corporate elites, or the elites in academic institutions and think tanks, or the marginalized communities? And if at all we listen to the marginalized communities, how is that going to happen? These are questions that we need to ask ourselves collectively before we completely give away our rights to state power and the corporations and the US. And in this context of the Indian government's dancing to the tunes of US imperialism, what does Hindutva really mean? Like, when the Modi and the BJP governments keep saying that we need to revive a Hindu nation because that is what decolonization means. Where is all this resistance to US imperialism gone? And that is also why in the poem I mentioned that decolonization is being used as a trope, and the trope to galvanize people's emotions and continue the mob lynching and the violence against the Muslim communities and the Dalit communities in the back door, as well as not respond in solidarity with the global South to challenge US imperialism. And decolonization is absolutely not about reinforcing or perpetuating any form of violence, extractivism, or systems of oppression. And it is important for us to remember to not fall for these authoritarian tropes, because these are nothing but distractions from what is actually going on, and that is Western imperialism and fossil fuel capitalism. So friends, in the next episode, which will be the part 2 or the continuation of this episode on crisis, I will take up the aspect of fossil fuel capitalism and fossil fuel capitalism, economic warfare, and fossil imperialism as such, which is another concept that is useful for us to make sense of the connections between attack against Iran, Palestine, Lebanon by the dual enemies and the dual forces of Israel and our enemies, and the dual forces of the US hegemony and Israel, and how they mobilize Islamophobia and Zionism to achieve their capitalist goals. So I will upload that after this video, once that video is ready. Until then, as usual, peace.